Hey everybody, welcome to Beyond the Gatekeepers. I am Bishop-Elect Vanessa M and I'm your host for this evening. And I want to bring on my co-host and my special guest host. So we have Bishop-Elect Troy Sanders, who is here with us. He is the senior pastor of Rehoboth Fellowship of Atlanta. And he's been helping me to hold it down for almost 2 months now. And so I'm so glad that you're here, Bishop-Elect Troy. And we have Professor Natasha L Robinson. She's no stranger to us. She is the founder of Legaleaze Please. She'll say a little bit more about herself, but she's been on our show before. And so tonight she's going to, and actually for the next couple of weeks, she's going to help us move along on this show. Hey, y'all. How y'all doing?
Hey.
So glad that you are both here. So let me just go to Professor Natasha Robinson. Tell the saints out here, and some of them are ain'ts too. So just tell everybody what it is that you are doing and what you're working on.
All right. Well, good evening to Lottie Dottie and everybody. That includes you if you're watching. Thank you so much, Bishop-Elect Brown and Bishop-Elect Sanders, for being here and for having me. And also in their absence, Bishop Flunder and Bishop Pearson. Thank you.
Yes.
I had a brain freeze. So I am the creator and curator of Legalese Please. It is a platform that is designed to deconstruct, demystify, and decode legal language. So in short, we build you up by breaking it down, the it being the policies, the terminology, the words, the cases, everything that has an intersection with your life. We do it in a way that is free from shame, because no one can learn by feeling shameful in their learning environment. So we teach in order for you to learn, in order for you to teach. So that is what I am in charge of. I'm just so glad to be here with all of you.
Awesomeness. Bishop-Elect Troy, tell the people they should know, because you've been with me for about 2 months now, but tell the people something about you.
Hey, everybody. What a joy it is to be with everybody tonight. This is going to be a great conversation. So I want to welcome you. I want to make sure that you invite your friends, your family members. This is important information. This is holy work. We're going to talk about that tonight. I'm so excited about being with my sisters, my friends, co-laborers in the ministry. This is ministry work. And Bishop-Elect Vanessa and Dr. Natasha, I am excited about this conversation.
Yes, I am too. But before we get to it, we want to welcome Facebook Live, because we know that they are here. We want to welcome YouTube and Twitter and all of the social media platforms. Will be on Spotify, so it'll play back tomorrow on Spotify. You can get it. But we want to know where you're from. So I see people, and I know y'all can see the scroll list right there as well. Y'all can feel free to shout out some people. Chuck Hunt is here from Monroe, Louisiana. We're so glad about that. Bishop Eugene Gathers is on from the College of Affirming Bishops, and he has a church in Charleston, South Carolina. We're glad that you're here. We have representing Jersey and Brooklyn. Leo is in the house. Sean Jenkins is here. We're so glad. Colleen, Texas, y'all, look at that. Y'all see all these folks.
Yes.
And we're asking to make sure y'all share. Bishop-Elect Sonia is on, checking in from Atlanta. Pastor Erica is here from Pennsylvania. Rhonda from St. Louis. Lisa from North Carolina. Yes, I see the saints. Karen Coleman from Boston, a faithful one to us. We're grateful. Oh my God. Miko Mo. Yes, McDonough, Georgia. Namaste. Also another faithful one. Davida Day McAllister. Welcome. So glad that you're here with us tonight. Marlene McLaurin here from Baltimore. So glad. Look at that. I'm going down the line. Siegfried Benton. Pastor Siegfried Benton from Temple Hills, Maryland is here. Minister Sandy Hudson. Also another faithful from Paris, California. JR from St. Louis. I see the saints. I love it. Tanya Jenkins Montague from North Carolina. Oh, my brother is up here. Antonio Knox. Minister Antonio Knox from Rehoboth. Yes. Linda Hewlett from St. Louis, Missouri. And our cousin is here. Carmen White Janak is here.
Hey, cousin.
From Tulsa. We're so happy. Listen, do us a favor and share it on all the social media platforms, because this is a conversation that you all want to be a part of. Let's bring our guest on. So we have Reverend Nikia Smith Robert. She has her Ph.D. She is the founder of Abolitionist Sanctuary, and we want to welcome her on tonight to Beyond the Gatekeepers. Welcome.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm excited about the conversation.
We're very happy to have you here and to talk about the great work that you're doing. And I know that people want to know a little bit more about what Abolitionist Sanctuary is all about. And so we want to give you the opportunity to at least tell your story and share, and everybody's going to have questions for you.
Yeah, how much time do I have to tell my story?
Go tell it. Tell it.
Go tell the story. So I am excited to be here. My name is Reverend Dr. Nikia Smith Robert. My story begins in Harlem, New York. I grew up to a poor single Black mother at the height of the war on drugs, which was really a declaration of a war on Black people. I grew up in the same building as many of the Central Park Five. Kevin Richardson lived right next door to me on the same floor, as well as Yusef Salam in the same building, and Corey Wise. And so that is just a glimpse of the magnitude of carcerality that ravaged my community. I also had family members, including my brother, who was just as impacted. And myself has also been surveilled and policed. And so this was my reality. I watched my mother circumvent the oppressive conditions of policing and poverty in Harlem, New York. And sometimes that meant bending rules and breaking the law to survive. And the womanist tenor, it was making a way out of no way. And according to society, my mother's survival strategies would be deemed criminal. But for us, it was salvific. It literally saved our lives, ensured that there was a roof over our head, clothes on our back, and food on our table. Sometimes in bending the rules and breaking the laws, she would forge a doctor's note from work to get a day off during an inconvenient school holiday because she could not afford child backup care. I remember one day as a little girl waiting for my mother in our common area where we lived, and this man had robbed the local video store. And as he was running through our complex, his gun fell at my feet. And what I thought were batteries that were scattering were in fact bullets. And so this is the pervasiveness of violence that my mother was trying to protect us from by ensuring she got home when she could not afford child backup care. Sometimes her ingenuity would call for her to do something creative with the rent renewal lease. If anyone lives in Harlem, they understand the pressures of gentrification and eminent domain.
Yes.
Right?
I'm from
With
Harlem.
University, especially. During that time, a lot of the buildings in New York City had expired on a Mitchell-Lama agreement, which was a tax subsidy that allowed owners to keep rents affordable. And when that expired, owners then privatized buildings, and my mother's rent went to market rate and increased 300%. For someone in her position, she was not poor enough, right? She did not qualify for vouchers, right? For Section 8, and she also made too much for the vouchers. And so the people in the middle there, even as a single mother providing for her family, would be displaced. And to mitigate against that, she would do creative things with the lease agreement. And so when I thought about my mother's survival strategies, her making a way out of no way, it wasn't because she was a criminal. It wasn't because she was a bad person. It wasn't because she was immoral. But in fact, she was exercising virtues of courage and creativity and ingenuity and making a way out of no way against larger structural injustices of poverty, of gentrification, of capitalism, right? And so my research is wanting to reappraise poor Black mothers' moral strategies, not as a vice, but as a virtue, not as criminal, but as salvific. And instead of casting individual blame, instead interrogating these larger structural injustices and the ways in which they are exasperated by policing and carcerality that is decimating our communities.
Did y'all hear what she just said? I hope y'all sharing this conversation.
Wow.
That's real. Of course, I grew up in Harlem, so I know all about where you grew up. I didn't grow up I was not that far away, actually like 6 blocks away, maybe from where you grew up is where I grew up. So I was able to see, and I know that you are telling the truth about everything that you have experienced. I know about that Mitchell Lama law. I know about NYSHA and how they do people as well, and all of those things. And it's so funny that you would even say that about the Schomburg, because like when the Schomburg went up, we all thought that was like, this is dope. This is the big league. You know what I'm saying? People are getting nice, places to live in Harlem, only to find out that, things were happening there too.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Things are happening there too. So it's just like what you're doing for Black mothers and what you are saying that are living in urban neighborhoods, urban areas, places where, again, capitalism prevails. I like what you say about breaking the law when the law breaks us.
Yeah.
Right. Mothers are around here trying to make $1 out of 15 cents, trying to feed their children and all of these different things. And at every turn, there is something to block them. And so this is a way, right? I mean, and it'll go all the way back to when Ronald Reagan started calling Black mothers welfare queens, right? Doing all of these things, all of this negative language, all of this negative talk, all of this degradation, when mothers were only trying to take care of their families.
Yeah. And so the story begins there. And based on those lived experiences, I conducted research to theorize around kind of the lived practices of poor Black mothers and their survival. And so I completed my dissertation titled Breaking the Law When the Law Breaks Us, a Womanist Theoethical Approach to Public Policy and Criminal Justice Advocacy for the Black Church. And I'm using heavily womanist scholarship there, particularly Katie Genevan canon, and this understanding of living a life under oppression, right? Living an ethic under oppression. And what does that entail to reappraise poor Black mothers' survival strategies, not as vice, but as virtue? Also looking at Dolores Williams and the ways in which she's moving away from the cross and the violence that happens in the glorification of death and suffering at the cross, and instead shifting our focus to the life and ministerial vision of Jesus and the way in which it is embodied through the African maidservant of Hagar in the wilderness, right? This way of making a way out of no way, and the carceral wildernesses that so many Black mothers find themselves in. And from that dissertation, Michelle Alexander, who's the author of The New Jim Crow, was a reader. And when she read this concept of intervention called Abolitionist Sanctuary, she's really excited about it and said, I would rather support you in developing this idea than for it to sit on a journal page that no one ever reads. And so 6 months after graduating with my PhD, I established a nonprofit organization called Abolitionist Sanctuary. And here we are. Abolitionist Sanctuary is leading a national coalition training Black serving churches, civic organizations, and educational institutions to organize against the moral crisis of mass incarceration and the criminalization of impoverished Black motherhood. So as you can see, my experiences, my research are all culminated as the foundation of the organization.
You say, and I'm going to let Professor Natasha get in here and Bishop-Elect Troy, but I got to ask this one thing. So on your website, and you start talking about your work and what you do, you talk about the punitive responses that take place in society, which finds their way into prominent spaces in church, right? In church teachings and practices. You talk about, theologies of sin, sacrifice and punishment, can reproduce carceral logic, all respectability politics, particularly targeting Black women who, quote unquote, transgress the boundaries of acceptable norms of holiness, right? We know I could tell you a lot about that. Sacrality, morality, and correctiveness, correctness of activities and behaviors. Talk a little bit more about the church and how the church has become complicit in co-opting state violence.
Yeah, that's the question right there, right? The church has been a harmful place for many of us. And the church has hidden behind its sacred texts, its scripture, its theologies as a way to justify its condemnation of a particular kind of body that transgresses acceptable standards of piety, of holiness, of sanctity, right? And one of those teachings is largely this notion of sin, and sin has become synonymous with the ways in which we construct certain bodies as deviant, as unholy, as unruly. And those notions of sin further lead to understandings of sacrifice, right? That if someone is constituted as sinful, then they no longer have any value, that they are no longer worthy, right? And that they must be sacrificed in order to restore the honor of people who are worthy. And so many people, women, trans, queer people, right, who are transgressing these boundaries of normative identity, right, construction of identity, are being scapegoated for the value of our doctrine, right, for religiosity, for the sake of being church. And we are losing people. We are hurting people. People are dying. And what we are seeing is that those theologies aren't saving people. In fact, they are dividing, they are destroying people and communities. And we understand that when we depend on theologies such as we got happy about it in church today at a funeral, the blood that never lose power. We just had Communion Sunday. Culturally, we'll shout on the blood, right? But theologically, the blood is a glorification of death that is not salvific, right? That when we see Breonna Taylor's blood, when we see Mike Brown's blood, right? When we see George Floyd's blood, their blood hasn't saved American democracy, right? That we are still here. And so how do we shift our theologies away from this glorification of suffering, of death, right? This dependence on sin to justify punishment? How do we shift away from these harmful teachings to more restorative, liberative, and salvific teachings that are aligned with Jesus's life and ministry, right? Because we know that the first Christian community possessed a criminal element. We know that Jesus himself was criminalized. We know that God cared so much about that criminalized body that incarnationally God broke into history through a brown Palestinian Jew, through a criminalized body. We know that Jesus had a concern for those who are criminalized when he said, as often as you've done it for the least of these, you've done it for me. And that was, have you visited me in prison, right? We know when he read from the scrolls of Isaiah saying, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, has called me to preach good news to the poor. And in that he said he has set the captives free. We know Jesus was an abolitionist, that Jesus was in the ministry of liberation, of setting folk free. So if that is the life and ministry of Jesus, and we are disciples to continue that, to walk into that, to extend that, then we too have a responsibility to get rid of, to discard harmful theologies of sin, punishment, sacrifice, respectability, and turn to what liberates, what heals. And that is liberation, that is justice, that is abolition.
So, in case you don't know, Reverend Dr. Nikia S. Robert is taking no prisoners tonight. And so y'all need to get ready. I'm going to let Professor Natasha and Bishop-Elect Troy ask their questions.
Ooh, child. You know how I feel about you, how I adore you, and I support your work. I mean, just so many different access points. What I guess I want to focus on first is the fact that your research is based on your experience, first and foremost. And that but for the intentionality and you telling your story, no one would know about your story and how you tell the story of your mom and why this is a calling, on your life. So I appreciate you situating your experience with your expertise, and also in showing that not only is data a bunch of numbers, but we are the data. We are the sacred text. And it takes the telling of our stories so that people can understand and know more than just a person's name or where they come from, but also that lineage and that legacy. There is in the book, Walking Through the Valley, which is edited by Dean Towns, Dr. Stacy Floyd Thomas, Dr. Allison Geis Johnson, and President Angela Sims. Yes, this right here, this book right here, if you don't have it, you need to get it. It is called Walking Through the Valley, A Womanist Explorations in the Spirit of Katie Geneva Cannon. Before I ask my question, for those who are not familiar with what the term or the ethic womanist means, can you explain what that is in your words and why that situates your work in terms of what you're talking about today?
Thank you for that question. So, womanism is a term that many people bring meaning to, and I'll share my perspective. For me, womanism is a study that allows me to center the experiences of Black women and their juxtaposition to the church, or their relationship to the church in their communities. Theoretically, womanism allows us to use as a way of knowledge production, a way of knowing these lived experiences, that it need not be a Eurocentric lens, right? We need not to start at Plato and Socrates, but that we can start at Mama and them, right? And so womanism is sacred for me because it is a way of doing theology that is a form of resistance against dominant discourses. And it is connected to lived realities and the interior lives of Black women and marginalized groups, that it starts with the particular before moving out to the universal. And so that's womanist scholarship for me.
Thank you so much for that. It definitely brings the understanding for me is that I do not have to identify as woman in order to be a womanist. Mm-hmm. I think that is one of the myths that may be, out there. There is a term that you use in the chapter that you contribute to this book. Your chapter is called Not Meant to Survive: Black Mothers Leading Beyond the Criminal Line. Can you explain to us what the criminal line is and how that is important in your research and your conversation today?
Yeah, so the criminal line is an extension of the color line, right? When W.E. Du Bois said the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line, I am suggesting that the problem of the 21st century is the problem of the criminal line. And the criminal line is the ways in which laws, regulations, rules, policies serve to target and discriminate against bodies who are considered deviant populations. And that when people transgress that line, right, when people cross that line, that they enter into this world of criminality and deviance. And so I am cautioning us against this problem as an urgent problem of the 21st century, is the ways in which this color line has become a criminal line.
I'm sorry, I muted myself because I was just sitting up here listening. That reminds me of, I've been having this conversation about the tension between morality and legality, mm-hmm. about how the laws come into play when a person or a group of persons' moralities change. And morality is not about righteousness or what is right. It is about what is deemed to be right at the time. And so when someone's laws are being changed, it's because there's a group that says what we thought was immoral then is now moral not now. And it continues to, move the chains. That's what I took from your work, is when you're talking about the criminal line, is that the line continues to change as the morals of the immoral continue to change. Yeah. And so what happens is that now you have poor Black mothers who are caught in between, as you said, what is deemed to be a vice, which is really a virtue, almost like when you say making a way out of no way. How are you trying to figure out how do you break the laws that break us? Which goes to show then really it's not really law breaking. It's more of surviving with the intention of thriving. So what you bring up, what you raise is just, like I said, if you all have not read this entire work, but if you have not read specifically this chapter, Not Meant to Survive, let me tell you, it's going to bless you. It's going to bless you.
Yeah. And, Professor Natasha, I would, love to continue to be in conversation, particularly from your perspective as an attorney, right? And the work that I'm doing around moral theology and legal philosophy. And the forthcoming book is doing exactly that. It's looking at these tensions between law and morality, which is a very long discourse and conversation and tradition that I hope to contribute to. And how it connects to my lived experiences is that sometimes breaking the law is the right thing to do, right? And so that becomes an issue of morality, and that there are just laws, there are unjust laws, and there are laws that are unequally applied. And in each case, I want to make an argument that justifies Black women's lawbreaking. And that when we see civil disobedience, when we see Dr. King talking about breaking unjust laws in the traditions of Augustine and so forth, right? That breaking unjust laws isn't the only qualification that justifies lawbreaking. That sometimes stealing is a just law. And we are justified to do that too when hungry, and especially when there are inequities, right? And so, and then when we talk about unequally applied laws, when we look at the case of Marissa Alexander and George Zimmerman, right? George Zimmerman and Marissa Alexander were in the same state of Florida, the same city of Stanford, the same prosecutor invoking or the same law of stand your ground around the same time period, but the results of their legal outcomes were drastically different. That George Zimmerman, who killed Trayvon Martin, was acquitted, and Marissa Alexander, who brandished her weapon against her abuser and killed no one, was initially sentenced to 20 years in prison as a Black woman, right? And so there's this whole racial and gendered stereotypes that construct Black women as angry, as salacious, as irreparable, right? And that somehow are warrant these egregious punishment in ways that white men aren't given the same scrutiny, right? And so both amongst the just, unjust, and unequally applied law, I would argue that in each case that we can find examples where Black women are justified because of the larger structural injustices and the double system of justice we have within our legal system.
Woo! Bishop-Elect Troy, you gonna jump in? Because I have a response to that, but I'm gonna wait.
I wanted to, you hit me with the whole concept of Jesus as an abolitionist, right? And I think that I totally concur with that construct, that liberation theology is birthed out of this notion that Jesus is our liberator, right? But I wonder how much of the church really wants to embrace Jesus as liberator or as abolitionist, because that means then Jesus's folk got to get free. And when we get free, we got to free others. Bishop Flunder lifts up a number of sermons on that sermon, that scripture, for it is for freedom wherewith Christ has set us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. So in what ways do you see that the system perpetuates itself because the idea of liberation is challenging to the institution?
Yeah, so this institution was built in servitude and captivity, right? In slavery, right? The birth. And so emancipation was an idea, but our very beginnings is wedded to this history of slaveocracy, right? And so liberation is a project that we are always aspiring to. And the way the system works, particularly empire, is to always reproduce itself. And so it's always pressing back against the project of liberation. And this is why one of the values of abolitionist creativity is so important, because empire will continue to reproduce itself and push back on the project of liberation, which means we have to be creative in the ways in which we are trying to actualize it, right? And so when we think about punishment, it is so embedded in our society. We are so conditioned to think that punishment is a first response and that it is effective, that we have stopped imagining alternatives. And that has prevented us from creating new solutions, right? And so I am an abolitionist in every facet of my life. I'm an abolitionist as a parent, as a partner, as a professor, as a preacher, right? And all the things, because I am convicted by abolition in a way that makes abolition equal to my religion, right? If God is a God of the oppressed, if Jesus is a liberator, if Jesus is an abolitionist, and I'm a disciple of Jesus, then abolition is my religion, right? And I don't have time to play games with it. And so I try to be consistent as much as possible. In fact, I was just recently racially profiled by American Airlines that entangled me into the legal system for the first time. And as a response, I won this case. I was accused of assault, and I won this case. And my response is, so the flesh in me wants the employee fired, right? Because I'm conditioned by punishment. But the religion in me, the abolition in me, is trying to identify alternatives that are restorative. And that is, I don't want this man fired. I don't think his family should suffer for his actions, right? So I think a restorative alternative is that he would be reassigned to a role that isn't public facing, that he receives some type of implicit bias training, that I receive some type of apology, right? So abolition calls us to do three things, and it's an alliteration of ours: to repair harms, restore relationships, and rebuild more just and equitable systems. And everything that I do, I'm trying to aspire for those three things: to repair, restore, and rebuild. In fact, that is a hashtag for us. If you ever see hashtag Abolitionist Sanctuary, following it is the hashtag repair, restore, rebuild. That is our theory of change. That is our philosophy. And so I carry that with me as a parent also, right? Because in many households, we grew up that punishment was the motivation, our external motivation to change our ways. But punishment doesn't change one's character, right? Punishment doesn't instill values or virtues. It doesn't really fix anything. So abolition calls us to get to the root of the problem, right? And to recondition ourselves so that we can restore relationships, so we could actually repair the harm, that we could build better people. And build a more just and equitable world. So this project of liberation is always a pushback against empire's proliferation and reproduction, right? And in order to do that, we have to be creative in how we are imagining new alternatives, and how we do that, for me, is rooted in the values of abolition and this understanding of repairing, restoring, and rebuilding.
You give, and I know Natasha wants to go, Professor. I'm gonna let you. I will let you.
You go ahead.
Let you redress. I want to, but I wanted to say, so everything that you just said around those 3 points, Audre Lorde says that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Is that right?
That's right.
And with that being said, you basically burn the house down, but then you give us tools. The church, you give us tools. Talk about those. I think you give us like 3 or 4 things around liberation theology, community-based virtues, all those things. Let's talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to let Professor Natasha give a redress to something you said earlier.
Yeah, I really appreciate us turning that corner, right? Because abolition isn't just a negative project, but it's a positive project. It's not just tearing down, but it's building up. And so what are we building as abolitionist sanctuaries, right? My vision is that we are building a faith-based abolitionist movement. I envision that we will certify churches, educational institutions, individuals, and communities to become abolitionist sanctuaries, that they have demonstrated their commitment to repairing, restoring, and rebuilding more just and equitable systems. And to do that, we want to train our communities to do that, right? And so our training is aligned with a system called PACTS. We create pacts with people, PACTS. And that is training people in the principles of abolition. I'm tempted to give you guys the exclusive drop, but in our phase 2 of our strategic plan,
come on, give it to us. Come on, Reverend Doctor, come on.
I didn't consult my board, so I don't know. But I may. But at phase 2 of our strategic plan, we are we've invested in a platform to train the next generation of abolitionists. And this is an online social learning and e-commerce platform, and a certification program where through our trainings, institutions and individuals can become trained in abolitionist principles, right? And part of that's the certification program. People can also take courses, freestanding courses. And in the long run, people will be able to take courses for credit, courses that comply with ATS accreditation, and they can take courses for credit in partnership with seminaries. And so we are educators. And that training is around public policies, it's around transformative justice strategies and liberative theologies that are rooted in abolition. So that is the principles of PACTS. We also, in order to become certified, you demonstrate comprehension of those principles of abolition through our trainings. You also demonstrate action steps, so deliverables, ways in which you are connecting those principles on the ground in real life situations. You are demonstrating the C, your ability to build coalition, right? Doing coalition work with the larger community, so that so much of the church is this isolated silo, right? But how are we going beyond the walls and into the community? And T, that you are transforming, right? That there is impact in the work that you are doing as abolitionist sanctuaries. And then finally, that after you have demonstrated the principles, the actions, the coalition, and the transformation, you then participate in a project, a capstone, to demonstrate that you are proficient, that you are certified, that you have the credentials of sanctuary. And so how that, you said the way we're doing that, it's through the liberative theology. So some of the things that I outlined here of how we understand Jesus's proximity to criminality. We also look at Hagar in the wilderness and how she's making a way out of no way, and how when God isn't a liberator, sometimes Black women have to liberate themselves. And sometimes that means bending rules and breaking the laws to survive in order to thrive, right? So that liberative theologies. We're also looking at public policy. I construct a quadrant, a matrix that churches can use to assess their theologies, to see how punitive, how complicit they are in carceral logic. So we do an assessment, this kind of audit of their teachings and practices, and then we help churches and communities, particularly churches, to construct interventions, public policy interventions. In fact, I worked with a phenomenal organization that I recommend everyone follow under the leadership of Charles Boyer, Salvation and Social Justice. We worked with his organization to consult them in developing a police accountability toolkit. And Salvation and Social Justice is doing transformative public policy work in Trenton, New Jersey.
That's New Jersey, yes.
The theological framing around that. And so that's the type of work that we're want to help churches do in terms of the public policy. And then the transformative justice piece. Ebenezer Church, the spiritual home of Martin Luther King and the home of Senator Raphael Warnock, has this Ending Mass Incarceration conference. And in their first iteration of that, they had an expungement seminar and bailout funds. And for me, that's a form of transformative justice, right? What are some of the things we can do now to disrupt the larger systemic injustices, right, and oppressions through our church? And whether that's delivering, I did a Abolitionist Sanctuary service with around the country where I helped church leaders reimagine their worship service through the lens of abolition. With one church, it was Word of Encouragement Church in Hawthorne, California, under the leadership of Reverend Nikia Smith, who's also a board member. I preached a sermon called Plan B. It was around the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And so it was a play on everybody, I'm sure have some familiarity with the contraceptive Plan B. And so I was playing theologically with the idea that perhaps Jesus was Mary's Plan B. That if Mary had a Plan A, she probably would have waited till she was older, till she was married, till she was more economically secure. But perhaps Jesus was Mary's Plan B. Vice President Kamala Harris got wind of that sermon. She asked for a copy of it and received one. And then at the end of that service, we worked with the church to deliver unused clothing items and hygiene products to a local girls group home, right? That's transformative justice. These kind of things, interventions we can do now to ensure quality of life as we are waiting to tear down the system and build something new. So these are some of the things, programs that Abolitionist Sanctuary is doing. And we are always looking for people to partner and support our work.
Wonderful. That's so good. So good. Listen, I want to say to our audience, if we have questions, I want you to write the word question and make sure that you ask your question so that we can ask for Reverend Dr. Nikia to give us an answer. And so we're going to go back to Professor Natasha Robinson.
Oh, I just want to continue with the flow with the way that you have said, because you did turn a corner. We went from the deconstruction to the reconstruction. And so what I was going to ask, I will wait till we're offline because it kind of goes back. In the interest of keeping to move forward, I want to ask you, what do you feel needs to be abolished in the church?
Yeah, I mean, the list, right?
It's long.
and what can we do individually? Because we may not have an abolitionist sanctuary, within close proximity. So what is it that you feel, and to make the list, to kind of truncate a little bit, I will say, what needs to be abolished in the church as it relates to your focus, which is poor Black mothers?
Yeah. I the church needs a do-over. Right? It needs a facelift. It needs repair. Transphobia, homophobia, misogyny, patriarchy, the policing that we do, right? We say we don't want drums, we don't want liturgical dancing, we don't want, uncovered women with uncovered hair. The young lady's skirt is too short. We don't say that about the brother with his sweatpants. We don't, right? Like, the sneakers and all the things, right? That we have to stop. We have to stop judging people. And that's the full stop. And we have to stop using our religion as a pawn to justify being mean and punishing and policing folk because they don't look like you. But they looked like you 10 years ago, right? They looked like you 15, 20 years ago. They may not look like you now, right? We're all on a journey and we are all becoming. And none of us have the authority to condemn and police and punish others because we have all fallen short, right? God is a God of love, and that God is a God of justice. And we were created in the image of God, the imago Dei, right? So that all of us have a belonging, a place, a way in which we see ourselves in God. So your image of God is no more holier than mine, right? Your reflection in God is no more holier than mine. So we have to stop being condemning. We have to stop being punitive. And particularly, we have to embrace this spirit of love and this spirit of justice, this spirit of community, right? That we have to see ourselves as connected, right? Because if we are condemning folk for the ways in which they love and the way, right, that's just not of God. No matter how we interpret, exegete that text, right? That the full stop is that God said, love your neighbor, love yourself, and love me, right? And so for me, that it begins with love. King always talked about love connected to justice, right? And so justice is another part of it. The Black church emerged out of a justice movement, right? In resistance to segregation and slavery, that we were birthed out of liberation, out of our desire for liberation. And so now to be selective in who can be free and who cannot, right? That we have to be consistent in the ways in which we practice our teachings, our beliefs, our faith, so that all of us can be free, that all of us can experience God love. And that when we can do that, then we can build this coalition, this community that's more powerful to resist the evils of the world, the injustices, the inequities, the oppressive, the interlocking systems of oppression. But if we are fighting each other and divided, then we're not strong enough to have a unified vision for what liberation looks like for our community and for our world. And so abolition is doing that deep work of repairing the harms in the church, right? In our teachings and our practices, so that we can restore relationships with one another and then do the work to rebuild more just and equitable systems. And Abolitionist Sanctuary wants to lead that movement. We want to lead that work and to train churches to have more restorative and liberative theology so that we can do the work of Jesus, and which is the work of abolition and the work of liberation.
It's so good. It sounds like, and I'm going to get to some of those questions. It sounds like one of the things you're saying is that the church needs to practice more grace. That yes. Amazing grace that we keep singing about and we keep talking about, that we don't have for other people, right? Yeah. That we don't have for people that don't look like us, that don't love like us, that don't live like us. Somewhere along the way, we lost the whole give each other grace, right? We lost it. We got caught up in the rudimentary things that we do on a weekly basis. It got caught up in, you know what I mean, the rules and the regulations and all of those things.
Absolutely.
I think we're so busy sometimes modeling what we say we abhor. So what happens is that now we are taking the world's outcome of what oppression is, and we are engaging in a hierarchy in church.
Yeah.
So it does become the policing of flesh. It does become the policing of agency, of choices, where it is the young lady that has to stand up and apologize to the church, but the young man who is, sitting down and just watching this like this is some type of entertainment piece. Where you have persons who will try and use what they believe, which may or may not be in line with the sacred scriptures, they will use it as a battering ram.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the biggest tools that we have that are in the institutions of education, the justice institution, religious institution, is the weapon of discretion, where we decide what is harmful, where we decide what is criminal, where we decide what is immoral. And when you use the testimony and the experience of grace, then all of that, it just all comes down. It becomes more of not a hierarchical relationship, but more of an outgrowth, where now I'm able to talk to you without judging you, without judging your decisions, without saying, well, if it were me, I wouldn't have broke that. You don't know what you would have done had you been in that situation.
Come on, because it's not you.
It is not you. Yes.
And how much of this critical nature in church is projections? It's the discomfort and dis-ease of ourselves that we have not found peace with our own souls. We have to torture and torment others because we are not free from ourselves in ourselves.
Absolutely.
Wait, now I got to read this little comment because this is going to... Dr. Jamie Edie Chisholm says, some of us also need to admit that we weren't interested in liberation. We just wanted privilege.
My God. Be it like the straight church in my context. Come on here.
Wow.
There it is.
That's it. Bishop-Elect so, and I'm gonna get to the question, said, like the legalistic affirming church. See, we go from one thing to another. You understand what I'm saying? So we say, okay, the mainstream church don't want us, but then we start making all these crazy rules in the affirming church, doing some of the same things, if not the same things that the mainline church is doing, right? And so we, again, put people, in restriction and, handcuffs, right? We arrest people, right? We have a way of arresting people in the church, and we couch it under the fact that we're arresting that spirit, whatever that spirit is. Oh, okay, let me be quiet.
But that's where the church comes in with, in the criminal legal system. You have the three components of the police, the courts, and the corrections. I would argue that in a lot of our congregations, we are still that criminal legal system. We are policing.
This is good. This is good. Judge and jury. Come on here.
We are policing, which I would argue mass incarceration doesn't always start with corrections. It starts with the policing, because you already have the mindset that you are already going to incarcerate this person, if not in a physical structure, then definitely in your mindset. You have already placed where they're supposed to be, which speaks to Dr. Nikia's point about the deserving and the undeserving. In the church, it is the just and the unjust, so
saved and the unsaved.
It is. So it's all of these different categories where we as a church, we are adopting what we say we abhor. We police, we provide sentence over people if they don't look like us, talk like us, believe like us, decide like us, and then we incarcerate them.
I want to know, can I get bail? Can I get bail?
No,
I get bail.
Because listen,
we repeat offenders. We can't get bail. We repeat offenders.
You can't get bail because according to the laws of this country, according to the 8th Amendment, it is not it's against excessive bail. That is considered to be excessive punishment. But we too busy doing things with our tithes and our offerings and not putting it all the time into those structures and those community needs that make sure that we are loving our Black mothers, that we are upholding them, that we are saying that you are divine. Because that's where also the conversation goes, is that if I don't think you're divine, then I have no problem relegating you to the margins, because I don't see the God in you. I don't see that you're deserving. I don't see that you are worthy. So I have no problem castigating you. I have no problem castigating your kids. Listen, and so the work that you do is so very important.
It is.
It's not just about organizations. It's about the individuals helping to make sure that we get this call forward.
I just want y'all to be the first cohort of individuals, abolitionist sanctuaries, because y'all done took all the theology and ran with it in this call. So I think I might pass y'all as the first cohort of individual abolitionist sanctuary. Maybe we'll go to the larger church.
Listen, we have to do this. We have to get up in these denominations. We have to get up in these convocations and have this same, listen, and adjudicate this matter. How about that?
But this is worship. That's what worship is.
Come on.
This is the
legal needs or spiritual needs.
That's right. So, and this is how we're trying to shift the conversation so that it looks like and sounds like this, right? This is the type of training that we want to do with churches and faith communities. So you're right. We are divine, right? That we are created in the image of God. In fact, Black Lives Matter LA, Melina Abdullah has a campaign right now that she does every year during Women's History Month called Black Women Are Divine. Right. And so how do we organize our church to connect to these social justice movements on the ground and connect our theologies to it? Right. We need not the movement to tell us that Black women are divine, that's a theology that should have started with us. Right. And that we could connected that to communities.
Bishop-Elect Sonia says you can't even throw yourself on the mercy of the church because mercy is not available. And that is the truth.
Amen.
That is the truth. Okay, I've got 2 questions. And I told you all, if you had questions, because we're going to have to wrap this up soon, that you need to write the word question and then write your question. So here is one. Carmen, cousin, is asking the question. How do we intentionally shift from our habitual inclination to punish over restore?
Yeah, it's a good question. I want to just throw out some data here. So Black women are the most religious demographic, right? According to Pew study research, that Black women amongst the most religious, and that Black women count on their religion to get through difficult times, right? Mm-hmm. Black women have among the highest incarceration rates in the world. The U.S. incarcerates the most women than any other country. So you would think carcerality is some of the hard times that Black women count on their religion to get through. However, only 1/3 of churches surveyed actually mention the criminal system in their sermons, right? So from the pulpit, we are not speaking to the experiences of Black women with carcerality. So that's the first place that provides us an opportunity to do some training and to do some reconditioning and to do some more work to be present and to speak to the experiences of Black women with criminality, policing, surveillance, punishment, and all the things, right? So I just wanted to frame that our churches aren't talking about this. Mm-hmm. And so that is a double burden for Black women because we are also overlooked in the national discourse about criminal reform, right? And in the criminal system. So Black women aren't getting any help from our society, and we're not getting enough help from the church. How we recondition ourselves is, it's a process, right? So my 10-year-old son, I once heard him upstairs tell my daughter, my 13-year-old daughter, that he hates her. I heard from downstairs, "I hate you." I summoned him downstairs. My initial response was to meet rage with rage. I wanted to cuss. I wanted to knock him beside his head, all the things that I was conditioned by in my parenting and in my environment. But convicted by abolition as a religion compelled me to think of some alternatives. So in that moment, I asked him to consider the harms that he caused, right? The harm of saying that you hate your sister. What does it mean to hate Black women, right? And what is the danger of that, the consequences of my daughter being raised with that understanding, right? And so we talked about the harms, right? I mentioned abolitionists to repair, restore, rebuild. How do we repair the harm that you caused by saying you hate your sister? And so we talked about that, and we identified some alternatives. And that was, rather than me punishing my son, taking away devices, grounding him, hitting him, screaming at him, cut all the things that some parents do, I said, how about for the rest of the day, instead of saying you hate her, how about you show her acts of love? For the rest of the day, you have to show your sister acts of love. Now, to a 10-year-old, that sounds like punishment, but it's not, right? It's instituting some values within him, right? And it's working to repair those harms. Once we repair those harms, then we can restore the relationship, right? And so how do we now coexist in this house as siblings through a relationship that begins with love, that we use love when we have conflict and not hate, right? And then how does that then create more just and equitable community in our house, right? That I'm not showing favoritism to one and, over the other, right? There has to be some equity in how we carry out our relationships with one another, because society has enough hierarchy, right? And those hierarchies are used to justify this narrative of worthy and unworthy, right? And so we don't want to reproduce that in our homes. So how do we create a loving home that's more just and equitable? So my point here is that it required some creativity and some pause for me to recondition the way I thought about parenting, not from a point of punishment, but from a place of restoration. And that is putting the abolitionist principles at play. For me, there are 5 abolitionist values. These values emerge for me out of the survival strategies of Black women like my mother's who broke the law to survive. It is compassion, creativity, courage, care, and community. I believe that when we rely on those 5 values or those 5 virtues, that it provides us a toolkit to practice an ethic of abolition in our relationships and within community.
Listen, you done taught some parenting skills. And all okay, thank you. Pastor Orphan, y'all see that up there? That's for real. Like, that is, you have given so much information, but so much good information that we can use in so many different ways. Somebody is asking, and I'm gonna say this, somebody is saying, what's the name of tonight's book? Well, the name of tonight's book is whatever Dr. Nikia S. Robert is going to name it.
We're going to name that book Abolitionist Sanctuary. And we're going to invite you all to support the work that we're doing and to find us everywhere where you are social, on the nets, on them in nets.
I love it. They're so good. Okay, let me ask the second question. Here we go. All right. When are we as people of color going to recognize the need to restore, repair, and rebuild the Black church? Hashtag religious emancipation. Anybody?
Yeah.
Well,
so, yeah.
No. You go. Go ahead, sir.
It's a communal project, right? What I like about abolition is that it is not an answer. That abolition is a process, and it's an invitation. It invites us into collectively imagine alternatives that are more just and equitable, and that will build communities of care. And so when people ask, what about the murderers? What about the rapists? How do we restore the church? I invite you to join us in this faith-based abolitionist movement to think about what are some alternative approaches to doing that work. We could think about some tangible things, right? Like no longer glorifying death and the blood and the cross, right? And sacrificial theology. no more using sin as a way to construct bodies as guilty and criminal and unholy and unworthy, particularly women, queer and trans communities. It means that we are socially engaged, that we are organizing collectively to change laws and policies to create this more just and equitable world that we and our children's children deserve. That is the kingdom of God, right? It is ensuring that that we are extending Jesus's life and ministry with an emphasis on liberation. That all that we do is rooted in liberation, in love, and in justice.
Powerful.
I'm sorry. My response, the first thing that came up for me was, do people have to share your same faith in order for you to meet their need? And the reason why I say that is because sometimes when we're talking again about adopting the master's tools, the master's ideologies, sometimes we hinge our care, our meeting of needs based upon, do you believe what I believe? Because if you believe what I believe, then it's a little bit easier for me to meet that need, or to meet the need before it becomes one. But when we're talking about the church, the Black church, whatever, I think one of the realizations, at least the one that I've made, is not everybody wants to be a member of the Black church. So what does it look like to be outside the traditional walls, the traditional function of church? What does it look like to be the church to people who may not want to be part of the church, but who still have needs? You know, we titled this Legal Needs or Spiritual Needs. So do you have to be a follower of Christ in order for me to be the Christ to you? Mm-hmm. Do you have to be in prison in order for me to now come and see about you? What does it look like for us to provide water without you being thirsty? What does it look like to make sure that you already have clothes before you go naked? And I think that when we start engaging in those type of conversations, then we are bringing from the margins to the center what Dr. Nikia is focused on, what this platform is about, by making sure that some needs don't become needs, by making sure we do not condition our help based upon your faith or lack thereof. And I think that that helps us to start reimagine, if you will, what does it look like to be the church, to be Jesus, to be justice, to be love. That is what came up for me.
That's really powerful. And for us, our immediate mission is to Black serving churches. We envision expanding that into a interreligious movement. And so you need not to be a Christian or follower of Jesus to be concerned about liberation and abolition. And I really, really appreciate what you're saying, Professor Natasha, about the ways we can be preventive and not reactive, right? The ways in which we can create the infrastructure for thriving before people encounter death-dealing circumstances, right? That we need to work for the more just and equitable world now, right? That our mission, our project should be the one of thriving and not just getting by day and doing church Sunday as usual, right? Church as usual. So I really like that. Like, how can we provide water before folk are thirsty? I think that's extremely, extremely powerful. And liberation, like love, has global translation, right? That there are people who are suffering all over this world. In fact, Abolitionist Sanctuary is in partnership with a foundation in Malawi called Othaka Harka with Ida Puliwa. and she's actually joining my class tomorrow from Malawi. And she has done phenomenal work to empower her village. And one of the things that I'm considering is the ways in which the African diaspora can be instructive for abolitionist global futures. Like, what can we learn from the way voodoo was used to overturn, the Haitian, to fuel the Haitian Revolution, right?
Absolutely.
What can we learn about the political resistance and the political fervor across the African diaspora for the project of abolition? So I am moving in my second book project. If I'm thinking this kind of trajectory, I'm thinking about the global implications of abolition and the African diaspora.
I love that, because it just made me think, and I know that Professor Natasha has one last question. It just made me think of indigenous faith religions, right? And how they can help us in terms of abolition.
Absolutely.
Even in the Black church, like, to show people what needs to be done. And there are just so many things that we have demonized along the way, right? Some of it is cultural, how we grew up, you know what I mean, society, but there are some things that I know that they have that can help us too.
Absolutely. And a lot of abolitionist practices come out of indigenous communities when we look at restorative peace circles and so forth. So absolutely paying homage to these indigenous communities that provide us a kind of toolkit, a pathway to imagine more just and equitable futures in this larger project of abolition.
Indeed. Professor, you have a last question?
I don't have any questions. I can convert, as they say in congregational meetings. I don't have a question, but I have a comment, which is just bless your heart, bless your work. If you could put in the comments later where we can find you, where we can support you. You have given so much meat for us, not just to consume, but to consume with intentionality. So that we can continue to be fed for weeks and for months to come. I know I think I speak for a lot of people who say, we support you, and we're going to put our feet to our own fire and make sure that we don't just support you but word, but also support you in deed. So I'm just glad that you came, that you provided all this information. Bless you so much.
Thank you, Professor Natasha and Soror, for this invitation. And I appreciate that in whatever room you are invoking Abolitionist Sanctuary. And likewise, whatever room I am invoking Legaleaze Please.
Yes.
So I'm grateful for this sisterhood and this partnership, and looking forward to co-publishing and doing some training together across our organizations. For those who are interested in Abolitionist Sanctuary, we would love to have your support. You can visit us at www.abolitionistsanctuary.org. There you're able to contribute to us financially. You can sign up for our listserv and be among the few who have, or the many who have, an exclusive update on this phase 2 of our strategic plan. As I have mentioned in this exclusive drop of our forthcoming social, educational, learning and e-commerce platform and certification program, we are rolling out a beta phase of that site. So if you are interested in being on testing our training site, please join our list and send me an email. If you want to be amongst the first cohort who are trained as abolitionist sanctuaries, reach out to us. If you are a church leader and you would like us to come and lead an abolitionist sanctuary at your church, please reach out to us. And then finally, we are having a gala in December, and we would love for you to join us for that. We are looking at sponsorships with Team Rock and other organizations who would help us to fund the work of building this faith-based abolitionist movement. You can also follow us on social media at Abolitionist Sanctuary or at Dr. Nikia S. Robert. And then finally, you can listen to our podcast, the Abolitionist Sanctuary podcast, on all streaming platforms where you listen to your podcast. So thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Nikia. We appreciate you. I'm going to let Bishop-Elect Troy, you have anything left that you want to say?
No, I just want to echo what everyone else has said. This has been such a rich conversation, the kind of which that will not just stir us to hear, but should stir us to do, and then be. So I want to encourage you as well to continue keep this conversation going. We continue to keep this conversation going, because real change will come out of these kinds of conversations and this kind of conviction.
Thank you. Thank you all so very, very much. I appreciate you on tonight. Legal needs are spiritual needs. We thank you so much for Abolitionist Sanctuary and all the work that you are doing, what you are doing in community, what you're doing in congregational life. It's needed, what you're doing in the world, right? And I want to encourage everyone, again, as she has asked and requested, if, first of all, share this particular Facebook Live, YouTube, whatever social media platform you can share it on, share it, because if your pastor has questions, if whoever is running whatever kind of outreach in your church has questions, in your synagogue, in your mosque, if you're listening, please have them listen to it, and then they can make contact, because all the information is already there to contact Reverend Dr. Nikia S. Robert. I think it's important that we become abolitionist sanctuaries, and I certainly am going to sign us up so that we can do that, so we can be taught exactly what we need to do. And sometimes we're doing social justice work and we think we know everything, but we don't know everything. There's still more that we can add to the work that we are currently doing. So we appreciate you so very much for that. Again, we say thank you so very much for being with us. We're going to go to our ads now.
Thank you.
So we thank you for joining Beyond the Gatekeepers, current events through a theological and justice-informed lens. We're so grateful to have Reverend Dr. Nikia Roberts here with us on tonight, Abolitionist Sanctuary. And so we're going to ask that you continue to support our broadcast. This information that you're receiving on tonight is a worthy of you all sending donations to us. And so our Cash App is $TFAM annual, and our PayPal is www.paypal.me/TFAM justice. So we pray tonight that you would give and make sure that you put, because you heard what you heard on tonight, that you wanted to sow a seed. We appreciate you. We want you all to meet us, and our presiding bishop is asking you to meet us in Atlanta, Georgia, July 5th through the 9th for our TFAM Holy Convocation, Miracles, Signs, and Wonders. Miracles, Signs, and Wonders. We will be at the Sheraton Atlanta Hotel in Northeast Atlanta, Georgia. Registration is $150 now, up until May 1st. After May 1st, it'll be $175, and then it's on-site registration, which is $200. And if you don't intend to come each day, then there is daily registration. You can also book your hotel. If you go to www.radicallyinclusive.com, there is a splash page. On that first page, you can go and register, and you can also go and book your hotel. There are key events that are happening through the week. We are having on Wednesday night, appointment of global presbyteries. On Thursday night, new ordination and new church affiliates. On Friday night, instead of a live recording, we're having a white party. On Saturday in the day, there's an Episcopal consecration. Those of us that are Bishop-Elects will be consecrated on that day. Saturday evening, we're having a Founders Night musical celebration and song for Bishop Flunder. And Sunday morning, we're having our Holy Communion anointing service. Prior to that, we're also having baptism on Sunday morning. So it's a full week. We want you to be there with us. Please register your children. There's a full track for children. Register your children as well. Thank you so much. And a Lenten webinar series is happening. You want to go down in the valley where the girls get naked. Somebody said, what? Say what? Yes. Womanist ecclesiologies at the intersection of law, sexuality, and theology. And so we have the pleasure of having, you've seen her here, Professor Natasha Robinson. We also have Reverend Naomi Washington Leapart, Reverend Melva Sampson, Reverend Dr. Melva Sampson, and also Reverend Irie Lynn Sessions. Reverend Dr. Irie Lynn Sessions will be there. You have to register for it. It is March 14th through April the 4th, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard, 6:30 p.m. Central. The cost is $100. And so I know that you want to hear that conversation as a part of a Lenten series. Please do not forget to join them. We thank you so much for joining Beyond the Gatekeepers. We say have a wonderful evening and God bless you.